Good morning, everyone. If I were to read to you the following passage, "Wherefore lay apart all filthiness and superfluity of naughtiness, and receive with meekness the engrafted word, which is able to save your souls." Some of you would be perfectly fine and comfortable with that. It's from the book of James, first chapter, verse 21. And I read it from the King James because it is my favorite passage in the King James Version of the Bible because it sounds so quirky. And if you really didn't know what it was trying to say, I think you'd be scratching your head. And in fact, if you brought somebody in off the street and you put a book in their hand and said, "Hey, this book is something special. It has supernatural power in it and it can help you live forever," whoa, you might get their attention. And then you say, "But it's written in Klingon." But don't worry. I'm sure with enough work and study, maybe some prayer, it'll all work out for you. That might not go over so well. And a lot of you saying, that's not the same. It's not. It's an exaggeration. But for those inside the church who maybe have a great level of comfort with older translations like the King James, it helps us understand what might happen when we assume that other people that we don't know so well have the same level of familiarity and comfort. And that's a lot of folks in American culture today. Many of the songs that we sing in church suffer from similar challenges. If you were to thumb through one of our songbooks, you wouldn't take too long to see some of our more favorite songs date back 100, 150, 200 years easily. Some are even older. In fact, if you've got your red songbook, just open the front cover to song 1A. And if you look there, you'll see a couple years, one on the left, one on the right. 1626 and 1625. That's a well-aged song. We don't sing that one often because it's not a large part of our local tradition of faith. But you can see the point that some of this stuff has been out there a while. And sometimes, while it might seem good and favorable to a lot of us, because these types of older songs tie us to the tradition of faith passed on to us by past generations, maybe we're proud of our Christian heritage and it stretches back for many generations and we've always sung the same songs and that's what we like. We wouldn't want it any other way. And for us, that sort of thing can form a key element of what it is to meet together and worship on Sunday mornings. And if we didn't sing those songs, we might feel a little bit impoverished. We might feel like we're selling ourselves short in terms of that connectiveness. On the other hand, many of those same songs were written when the King James Version of the Bible was really the only Bible available to the English-speaking world. And for Christians the world over, they all read from that same text. And the language was not as alien to them as it is to us. The reason the King James is written in the Elizabethan prose that it is because that's what people spoke in England at the time. And it was only over time that our English language has evolved away from that. And so, as strange as some passages from the King James might read, same is true for songs that are written from that viewpoint and borrowing words and phrases from the King James. And so if someone comes in the door and we ask them to worship with us and we want them to feel comfortable, but maybe they don't have the same background that some of us have, and we don't necessarily know where they've come from or how much they know about the Bible or what version they've read, if any, it can be a little bit off-putting to them. You know, one of the things somebody's likely to notice right off is there's no organ up here, there's no band, there's no drum set. That in and of itself may come as a surprise. And then when we open our songbooks and go to sing, we're trying to do some sometimes challenging singing. we have multi-part singing, 3-part, 4-part harmony. We often don't do it well, and that's just fine. But for somebody coming to something where they're not used to seeing that and not used to hearing it, it's like, wait a minute, what is going on here? And the mind can start playing tricks on us and say, I don't know how comfortable I am worshiping with that group because the concepts are alien, the language is alien, the singing is challenging. Maybe I don't even know how to read music. And I'm trying to figure out what to sing by listening to people around me, and they're all singing different stuff. We take it for granted. And some of the things that we take for granted that help us feel united and interconnected leaves them feeling isolated and alone. So having said that, there are some songs whose lyrics are obscure enough that even lifelong Christians who've been in a particular fellowship over many years, they've just always sung the same old songs, they don't even necessarily understand the words. And they've been singing them a long time. That also poses a problem. It is difficult to claim with veracity that we worship in spirit and in truth if we don't really know the meanings of the songs that we sing. 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 15. If you want to turn there, I'll give you a moment. See Apostle Paul writing. It indicates that understanding should be a natural part of our singing. Paul asks a rhetorical question. So what shall I do? And then he answers it himself. I will pray with my spirit, but I will also pray with my understanding. I will sing with my spirit, but I will also sing with my understanding. So given that there would seem to be some benefit to be found in explaining some of the more obscure lyrics we find in our songs, I'd like to review some of those with you this morning. Let's start with song number 139. 139. This is Master, the Tempest is Raging. I would say this is one of the easier ones we'll look at. I don't know if that's true, but by comparison, I think it's okay. This song was written in 1874, and it is presented as a multi-layered dialogue with Jesus. Let's look at verse 1. Master, the tempest is raging, the billows are tossing high. The sky is o'ershadowed with blackness, no shelter or help is nigh. Carest thou not that we perish? How canst thou lie asleep, when each moment so madly is threatening a grave in the angry deep? It introduces the recurring theme of the song, which is one of distress in the face of danger and uncertainty. The opening word, master, is just a reference to Jesus himself. And a tempest, though we don't typically use this word in this context anymore, is a fierce storm, like a severe thunderstorm or maybe even a typhoon. Billows can be clouds or waves or any similar undulating material. If you played the game parachute in physical education class, you would shake the parachute up and down to make the big roll. Those are also billows. In this case, we can figure out that the author is talking about waves because it talks about them tossing high. So it's not clouds coming down low, it's waves going up high. Move on to verse 2. Master, with anguish of spirit, I bow in my grief today. The depths of my sad heart are troubled. Awaken and save, I pray. Torrents of sin and of anguish sweep o'er my sinking soul. And I perish, dear Master. Oh, hasten and take control. When we're looking at verse 1, we find an allusion to the gospel account of Jesus when he's sleeping in the ship on the Sea of Galilee, with his disciples struggling to sail away in a mighty storm. Verse 2 somewhat transitions to our lives today. So to understand the relationship of the two, let's look at Luke 8, starting in verse 22 through 25. Luke 8, starting in verse 22. One day Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side of the lake." So they got into a boat and set out. As they sailed, he fell asleep. A squall came down on the lake, so that the boat was being swamped, and they were in great danger. The disciples went and woke him, saying, "Master, Master, we're going to drown." He got up and rebuked the wind and the raging waters. The storm subsided, and all was calm. "Where is your faith?" he asked his disciples. In fear and amazement, they asked one another, "Who is this? He commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him." And that's where you get the chorus. The winds and the waves shall obey thy will. We also get follow-up in Mark 4, 35 through 41. Mark 4, 35 through 41. It's a different telling of the same event. And the same day, when the even was come, he saith unto them, "Let us pass over unto the other side." And when they had sent away the multitude, they took him even as he was in the ship. And there were also with him other little ships. And there arose a great storm of wind, and the waves beat into the ship, so that it was now full. And he was in the hinder part of the ship, asleep on a pillow. And they awake him, and say unto him, "Master, carest thou not that we perish?" And he arose and rebuked the wind, and said unto the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said unto them, "Why are ye so fearful? How is it that ye have no faith?" And they feared exceedingly, and said one to another, "What manner of man is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" The author quickly takes that Bible passage laid out in the first verse, and then applies it to our daily lives in verse 2. "Master, with anguish of spirit, I bow in my grief today. The depths of my sad heart are troubled. Awaken and save, I pray." The notion is that maybe we set sail on life's journey with Jesus with us, thinking everything's going to be good, everything's going to be smooth sailing. And then trouble comes along, and we're like, "Where's Jesus? I feel so alone. Why isn't he taking care of this?" And that's the allegory that this author is drawing in this song. Verse 3 continues on with, "Master, the terror is over, the elements sweetly rest. Earth's sun in the calm lake is mirrored, and heaven's within my breast. Linger, O blessed Redeemer, leave me alone no more, and with joy I shall make the blessed harbor and rest on the blissful shore." It's a resolution to both the Bible story and what happens in our lives when Jesus does step in and bring about the sort of resolution we're looking for. Let's move on. Number 253. 253. We have an anchor. Nautical theme, very popular. Even more so than the first song, we look at this and we say, if I'm not from a Christian background, what on earth does having an anchor have to do with being a Christian and having my faith where it belongs? Well, it was written in 1882, and if you think about it, there's a lot of symbolism here related to our lives with Jesus, and again, the concern for safety in the face of stormy seas. Will your anchor hold in the storms of life, when the clouds unfold their wings of strife? When the strong tides lift and the cables strain, will your anchor drift or firm remain? We have an anchor that keeps the soul steadfast and sure while the billows roll, fastened to the rock which cannot move, grounded firm and deep in the Savior's love. First verse is pretty straightforward, but we do have some interesting description of wings of strife associated with the clouds. Well, that is to say that there are forces in this world that forcefully create strife in our lives, as if they were a mighty bird flapping their wings, creating chaos in the wake. And then we have this reference to the anchor, essentially the thing or things upon which we depend for our stability and security. Everybody has one or more anchors, but this song calls to light the fact that not all anchors are created equal. And like a sailor on the sea, when a big storm blows up, You want the very best anchor because your life depends on it. We've got the recurrence of the billows, very popular in 18th and 19th century poetry. And then it's fastened to the rock which cannot move, which in one sense describes our relationship with Jesus, but perhaps more importantly, our relationship with God through Jesus. Let's pause and look at the Bible passage that this comes from. Hebrews 6, 17 through 20. Hebrews 6, 17 through 20. In the same way, God, desiring even more to show to the heirs of the promise the unchangeableness of his purpose, interposed with an oath, so that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have taken refuge would have strong encouragement to take hold of the hope set before us. This hope we have as an anchor of the soul, a hope both sure and steadfast, and one which enters within the veil, where Jesus has entered as a forerunner for us, having become a high priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. Song number 713. This is one of the more challenging ones. 713, Night with Ebon Pinion. It's a short song, which is probably good, written in 1854, and it leans very heavily on the poetic language throughout. And it opens with those words that have caused so much consternation over the years. Night with ebon pinion brooded o'er the veil. Wow, what does that mean? And if you were to say this to someone off the street, they'd be like, excuse me? What? And if they were to come in and see us and hear us singing that, they'd be like, you guys have totally lost me. Well, it's a reference to another Bible passage. Specifically, it's Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, just before his betrayal and arrest. The introductory word, night, is confirmed in Gospel as the time during which these events took place. And this particular night is then followed by some descriptive terms pertaining to that night. One, it's foreboding. Jesus knew what was about to happen in the hours, if not minutes, to come. This night was one of ominous portent, as they would say in classic literary circles. And in antiquity, ravens, crows, and other black birds were considered to be harbingers of doom or bad omens. You might think about what comes to mind when you think about a vulture. It's not a pleasant thought, right? So leveraging that ancient motif, the lyricist presents this night as though it had the black feathers of such a bird. That's where the ebon pinion comes in. Pinion is a word referring to the outer part of a bird's wing, where the feathers stick out and interact with the air during flight. And ebon is just a poetic shortening of the word ebony, which is a fancy way of saying black. And this dark night is one of brooding or dark thoughts as Jesus wrestles with the apprehension of what lies ahead. And in a subtle play on words, this night, as a grim bird of despair, is resting over the scene as a bird would sit on its nest waiting to hatch its eggs, an expectation of the evil events about to hatch and unfold. And all of this is happening on the Mount of Olives. The Garden of Gethsemane is located at the base of that mountain. So from the top, this night is perched over the garden, Jesus, and the valley of Jehoshaphat between the Mount of Olives and Jerusalem. Thus, this dark night with such ominous tidings is perched, hovering over Jesus and the surrounding valley, filling his heart with sorrow and waiting for the evil that is about to come forth. Let's look at Mark 14, verses 32 through 42. Mark 14, starting in verse 32. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow, to the point of death," he said to them. "Stay here and keep watch." Going a little farther, he fell to the ground and prayed that, if possible, the hour might pass from him. "Abba, Father," he said, "everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Simon," he said to Peter, "are you asleep? Couldn't you keep watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Continues on, and you can see that reflected in the remainder of the song. One more as time is running out. Let's look at song number 165. "O thou fount of every blessing," 165. This one's a little older than some of the other ones we looked at, written between 1758 and 1760. This is actually a song of tribute to God, our Father in heaven. For he is the fountain or source from which every good thing flows. I think most people are okay with most of the song, but a question that often arises is in verse 2 when it says, "Here I raise my Ebenezer." And for most of us, the only Ebenezer we know is Ebenezer Scrooge. And we're like, what's he doing in the middle of this song? Doesn't make sense. Well, it made more sense a long time ago when people were writing this and looking closely at their King James Bibles. This isn't limited to King James, by the way. You just got to follow along with the language bit. Ebenezer is an English way of saying Eben Ha'ezer, and that is Hebrew for rock of salvation or stone of help. If you were to open the blue books and find the same song, they actually have a little footnote that says stone of help is what Ebenezer means. And that's an allusion to the Old Testament story of God providing the Israelites with victory over the Philistines. The key verse can be found in 1 Samuel chapter 7. 1 Samuel chapter 7. It says, "Then Samuel took a stone and set it between Mizpah and Shen, and called the name of it Ebenezer, saying, Hitherto hath the Lord helped us." And hitherto is simply, well, here and now. It's where we've traveled to. It's not over there, it's it's here, hither. And so when we talk about this stone of help that we're raising in this song, we are raising a memorial of praise to God for providing us with our salvation. It's not military as it was in Samuel's case, it's spiritual, but that's even more important. There's also a play on words here, because if you follow along in other areas of the Bible, you find that God himself is described as the rock of salvation or the rock of help. And so when we raise our Ebenezer, we are elevating, praising, worshiping God himself. What would be more fitting in a song of tribute such as this?
If you are raising your rock of help, seeking atonement with God, and would like to seek the prayers of your brothers and sisters, or if you have not yet been immersed into Christ and have decided to do so, please contact one of the elders to share your wishes.